Good evening, everyone. Hello. Can I invite you all to take a seat as we get started with this evening's event? Wow, the power of the podium. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelly McKinley, and I'm the Executive Director of Education and Public Programming here at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And on behalf of our CEO, Matthew Teitelbaum, it is my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening for this, the third edition and the third year of Walrus Talks at the AGO. In the first year, we explored and debated whether Toronto would ever be beautiful. Last year, we talked about the art of the city, and this year, we'll be talking about sustainability. And it is my pleasure now, and I would ask all of you to join me in welcoming our partner on this incredible program, the Executive Director of the Walrus Foundation and co-publisher of Walrus magazine, Shelley Ambrose.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Kelly and Matthew Teitelbaum and everybody at the AGO. We're thrilled to bring TD Presents the Walrus Talks back to the AGO for the third year. We also hope that you've had a chance to see the current exhibitions at the AGO, especially if you're from the Walrus. The AMIA AGO Photography Prize exhibit, which is on the main floor. There are 4 shortlisted photographers there, and once you see them, you can vote right there, or you can vote online. The voting closes on November 6th, and the winner will be announced live here on November 7th as part of these really cool First Thursdays evenings that the AGO is having now. And if you want to be there, get your tickets really fast because First Thursdays are very popular. AMIA is one of our sponsors for the Walrus Talks and everything that we do at the Walrus, and we're grateful to them for their support and for their commitment to the arts. We're also extremely grateful to our returning presenting sponsor, TD. Each year, TD signs up for another Walrus Talks at the AGO and makes it possible for us to do this. Because of them, it's become an annual fixture. And I'm going to talk about them a little bit more in a moment. I'm just going to step back for a second in case you don't know why you're here or what a walrus is. The Walrus Foundation is a national nonprofit charitable foundation with a very serious educational mandate to create forums for debate on matters vital to Canadians. It is a serious mandate. We don't take ourselves that seriously. We do take our work seriously. One forum for the Canadian conversation that we create is the Walrus magazine, published 10 times a year. I am co-publisher of the magazine along with John McFarlane, who is also the editor of the magazine, who is here tonight. When you open the Walrus magazine, and I hope you have or will, you'll find stories on politics, art and culture, the environment, business, technology, sports, foreign affairs, society. The Walrus has no wings. We are an independent entity with no owners and no one point of view. In other words, if you agree with everything in a single issue, we are probably not doing our job. Our special, the Walrus was born in 2003, which makes this year, in fact, this very month, our 10th anniversary. Yay, yes, it is somewhat of a miracle. Our very special 10th anniversary collector's edition on sale now at finer newsstands everywhere and at the Walrus Lemonade stand at the back there, waving. It's a cover by Edward Bertinsky. It also features a photo essay by Edward Bertinsky, which he donated to the Walrus Foundation for our 10th anniversary, which is fantastic. And it's chock full of lots of other things. So if you don't have it, I encourage you to pick it up. Over our first 10 years, which is the way we think about it, we're looking forward to the next 10 and beyond, the Walrus has been the most awarded publication in Canada. We also want you to know that in addition to the Walrus's print, tablet, and phone editions, we produce a ton of content on our website at thewalrus.ca, on Walrus TV, in our ebooks, and on stages like this from coast to coast to coast. The Walrus Talks events this year alone in Victoria, Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal on topics as wide as the Walrus Talks conversation, experimentation, philanthropy, performance, and energy. By the end of this calendar year, we'll have 127-minute speakers on all of these different topics. How do we arrive at our topics, we are often asked. Well, the mandate is to create forums for conversation on matters vital, and there are many matters vital to Canadians. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a more pertinent topic than sustainability as it relates to cities. Our population, as I'm sure you know, is overwhelmingly urban, and the issues that cities, all cities, face in planning for the future are some of the most pressing issues of our day. From trees to water to food to population, the ability of cities to survive and thrive into the future is key. Ideas and conversations about these issues and how we build for the future are crucial for all of us. If you want to revisit or have somebody who isn't here hear all of the speakers tonight, we are being recorded by the AGO team over there. We're available for viewing at thewalrus.ca/TV, and we're live streaming tonight to viewers online everywhere. Of course, there's always a conversation happening on social media. If Twitter is your thing, the hashtag for this event is Walrus Talks, and our own Twitter handle is @WalrusMagazine. Just before I explain how the Walrus Talks works, I'd like to introduce our presenting sponsor to say a few words. As I mentioned, TD is a long-time supporter of the work we do at the Walrus, and their forward-thinking efforts to support a wide variety of groups on issues like the environment, education, and culture are all about strengthening community. Please join me in welcoming TD Senior Manager Alan Convery.
Thank you, Shelley. Just so you know, that cover you have on the Walrus that painting went for $32,000 last night at the Art for Heart contest. It was amazing, right? Anyway, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for the kind introduction. On behalf of all of my colleagues at TD, I'm delighted to join all of you this evening at this special event of the Walrus Talks. It's actually a wonderful feeling to be surrounded by so many people who I believe must be truly committed to the ongoing dialogue about sustainability and its inherence of the environment. In our opinion, it's the thought leadership events like the Walrus Talks that can only serve to stimulate ongoing debate, increased attention, and more frank discussion on the topic of sustainability. And it's a great fit for us at TD. At TD, we are committed to environmental leadership, and you'll hear much more about that tonight by somebody eminently more qualified than myself. But we are, after all, the Green Bank, and for us that means providing thought leadership and facilitating discussions on environmental issues, and more importantly, embedding the environment across our entire business enterprise, making it a factor in just about everything we do, from how we design and operate our facilities, and how our employees work, and how we engage the community, how we engage our customers. It's probably quite fair to say that our commitment to the environment has actually transformed TD. In my job in community relations, I get to give money away. And ironically, that's not always an easy thing to do, but TD understands it as an opportunity for corporations the size of ours to support the information dissemination efforts of organizations like the Walrus, a partner that we believe is not only responsive to the needs of its own readers, but they're continually looking to educate the broader community on the challenges that many people face on providing access to value-add information. And they are, in fact, enabling real discussion and real point-of-view thought leadership. And you know what? We actually think you're doing it quite marvelously. In fact, we're already looking forward to the next installment of Walrus Talks when that comes around next year, whatever that topic is. So a very big thank you to all the folks at the Walrus and their extremely very hardworking staff and this evening's speakers on bringing a stimulating evening of reflection and thought-provoking ideas. And we can talk all about it at the cocktails later. Thank you.
Did you just hear what I think I heard? Did you hear that? Did you? So why don't we? Thank you very much, Alan. And thank you to Scott Mullen and everybody at TD. Now here is how the Walrus Talks works. It's very simple. Each of our esteemed speakers has exactly 7 minutes. Each one will come on stage and introduce him or herself by name. There is no MC. We expect you to be smart enough to follow along the program. And if you would like to know everything about them, turn it over and read their bio. I will not be reading it to you. Each 7-minute talk acts as a standalone segment, so speakers will not refer to the speaker before them like, yo, David, that was fabulous. That won't happen. Or you're really going to like, that won't happen, because the podcasts are 7-minute segments so that when out in the world people can listen to every speaker in whatever way they would like to do that and not be confused by something they haven't seen or heard. You will hear and see them 8 in a row, and our hope is that an hour from now we'll have a lot to think about and more to talk about at the post-talks reception. Our single goal for the Walrus Talks is that our audience, you, at the end of the hour think, I never thought of it that way. So you're going to hear 8 very different perspectives on very many things. Just before I disappear and let them get underway, I'd like to thank our speakers in advance. We're very grateful to them. Thank you very much to the University of Toronto's Dennis O'Hara, the Globe and Mail's Doug Saunders, filmmaker Kat Cizek, Investico's Andrew Heintzman, filmmaker Katarina Sokup, Park People's Dave Harvey, TD's CEO, in this case that's Chief Environmental Officer, Karen Clark-Whistler, and Cape Farewell's David Buckland, who's about to launch a new exhibit in Toronto called Carbon 14. Thank you all for coming. Let us begin.
Hello, I'm Dennis Patrick O'Hara. We once believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, and as the most important creature on Earth, the universe seemingly revolved around us. We held center stage. Thanks to the advances of science, we no longer believe in a pre-Copernican universe. We just act as if we do. I contend that we might adopt more sustainable behaviors if we better understood and accepted the lessons of our new post-Copernican creation story. Let's examine that story more closely. Imagine that you are asked to write the history of the universe. The universe is 13.8 billion years old, but for our purposes, imagine that it is roughly 15 billion years old. It's just easier to do the math. As you write this great epic, you decide to record 1 million years of history on each page. In each volume will be 500 pages long, and you will need 30 volumes to write the complete history of the universe. In this chronology, Earth appears in volume 21. The most primitive cellular life on Earth appears in volume 23. And the most primitive humans, and I do mean most primitive, appear on page 498 of volume 30. And what we would call human civilization is the last word, a very small word, on page 500 of volume 30. If we take a closer look at volume 30, we see how new species gradually appear in the story, generally from the less complex to the more complex. There are 5 lessons that I want to draw from this story. They're all self-evident, but we seem to ignore them. We used to believe that the Earth rotated through an ever-renewing cycle of seasons. While we evolved, because we were obviously smarter than our ancestors, everything else was a stable stage moving through the 4 seasons of renewal. The new universe story teaches us that this continuously unfolding, irreversible, evolutionary universe that we live in calls us to live up to our mistakes. We cannot avoid them. We can't simply do them over the next time around. Because our impact on the planet is now so much greater than before, Earth's ability to repair our footprint is being overwhelmed. The universe story tells us that every time it has evolved, that over time it has evolved from a relatively simple and small quantum of energy, a so-called Big Bang, to an enormous cosmos with billions of galaxies, with billions of stars, and at least one planet resplendent with an abundance of diverse life forms and ecosystems. As we will look back over these 13.8 billion years of cosmic history and the shift from mere energy to matter, to stars and star systems, to life forms, and even to very advanced life forms, we see a pattern of increasing complexity and diversity, including increasing biodiversity. Lesson 2. The universe story teaches us that human behaviors that decrease biodiversity and complexity, preferring tamed ecosystems, monocultures, and uniformity, are working against a basic principle of the universe that has been working well for the past 13.8 billion years. Sorry, I must be hitting this. There we go. If Earth appears in volume 21, and the phytoplankton that oxygenate the planet appear in volume 23, could humans have appeared in volume 22? Well, clearly not. We need an oxygenated planet in order to live. Millions of species had to emerge in the story to transform and prepare an Earth that would be hospitable to human habitation, and more importantly, to evolve the complex tissues and organ systems that make up our human anatomy. While players who emerge later in the story rely on earlier players, the reverse is not true. Phytoplankton in the oceans could more or less continue their lives if plants and insects were extinct. And plants or insects could more or less continue their lives if mammals and birds were extinct. But mammals and birds would perish if plants or insects went extinct. Lesson 3. The later you emerge in the story, the more vulnerable your life form is. Humans are latecomers. We are among the most vulnerable. While we are a great, complex biological accomplishment of evolution, we are not the lords of creation. Rather, we are the most vulnerable. Every book in the universe story is populated with characters who are contributing to the unfolding of that story, whether the character is an exploding supernova or a phytoplankton. For the universe to exist exactly as it does in this particular moment, every subject in the story in the preceding volumes had to play its role, unfolding the storyline exactly as it did. Change any of the characters or change any of their roles, and this moment would be different. Every entity, every subject in the story makes a meaningful contribution to the story, whether we are aware of that meaning or not. Lesson 4. Earth is a single community joined in a single story where every player or subject has contributed to the unfolding of that story in a meaningful way. We share a finite planet, a common atmosphere, a common biological and geological heritage, and a common future for the planet. We share the planet with all the other life forms, affecting and being affected by them. Humans are not the only subjects. Earth is comprised of a community of subjects, not a collection of objects. We are fashioned by the creative evolutionary processes of Earth, the products of billions of years of evolutionary accomplishments assembled into a complex creature, the human being. We are formed by and sustained by the Earth's systems. As such, it is not possible to have healthy people on a sick planet. When Earth's atmosphere is polluted, its water's toxic, its soil's depleted, human health is at risk. When I have the flu, even if I'm convinced that the world is ending, it is not the case. Earth health is primary and human health is secondary or derivative. Similarly, Earth economy is primary and human economy is derivative. If Earth's economy collapses, ours will as well. Lesson 5. Earth is primary, humans are derivative, not the reverse. We must support and celebrate the common good, not only because this is the moral choice, but because it promotes decisions that are mutually enhancing for us and the rest of creation. It is in our best interests for a sustainable future. Satisfying individual desires and ambitions should not be at the expense of the long-term health of the common good. Those who would argue that we cannot address environmental concerns if doing so would place constraints on our economic prosperity are still stuck in an outdated, pre-Copernican way of thinking. Let's welcome them into the 21st century. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Doug Saunders, and I'm here almost to set a backdrop for this with the question that almost underlies all of these sustainability questions, which is the question, are humans sustainable? Because sustainability, of course, is a human conception. It's the current that lies under it is the question of whether we can keep nature from killing us as quickly as it would like to. And how do we look at this? The first thing you need to know about if you want to ask if humans are sustainable is this thing called the Hayflick limit, which was discovered in 1961. Before that, we'd thought that human cell division, which is what keeps us going, could keep on going forever. And Dr. Hayflick discovered that human cells can divide about 60 times maximum. Human cells divide about every 2 years. So the physical limit, even if you could get all the medical and nutritional things perfect, humans are capped out at about 120 years longevity. And not only that, but if you could figure out a way to engineer the human cell so that it could divide more than 60 times, it would basically become a cancer cell. So any attempt at infinite life would be the result of infinite cancer. It's almost a classic example of the human paradox. So basically, natural causes are going to remain the main killer of people. You could say that nature is going to murder us in the end, no matter what we do. But when we look at the limits to human sustainability, we're probably not generally looking at our own personal sustainability as much as we might like it, but rather the sustainability of human communities, the question of whether our children and grandchildren and so on are going to be sustainable. And for most of human history, certainly of written human history, as far as we can tell, people have assumed that no, we're not sustainable, that we are a fleeting phenomenon, life is suffering, we are going to be snuffed out, or there is going to be some eschatological cataclysm that will bring us to an end, and so on. It's rooted in human thought. And during the last 200 years or so, there have been more scientific attempts to look at the sustainability of humans, the most famous of which is the Malthusian view, of course, which is that our sustainability will be limited by the fact that we are going to multiply in number so much that we will consume all of the resources that support us, especially food, and if not, die of starvation. Because of that, we'll all murder each other in competition over the last scraps of resources. There are variations on the Malthusian theme around various resources, including petroleum, that are popular these days. But Malthus himself was imprisoned by the era that he was in, which was the last era during which the majority of Europeans and Westerners were peasant farmers. And he didn't realize that what he was observing was a consequence of two factors in this, which is that if the majority of your population are peasant farmers, your population will reproduce at an extremely high rate, and that you'll produce very little food. And the Malthusian explanation of the limits gave way to what we call the Boesruppian explanation, named after Esther Boesrup, the Danish economist and feminist, who realized the problem with the Malthusian theory and its agricultural basis. And the Bose-Ruppian theory essentially holds that the less of your population who are farmers, the more food you produce, and the lower your rate of population growth. Part of this was her understanding that the rate of education of women in a society is the key factor behind the sustainability of the population and the resources, the reduction in population growth and so on. But that itself is a consequence of urbanization and reduction of these things. And the Bose-Ruppian law has proved to be one of those laws, like Moore's law or Newton's laws, that are pretty consistent throughout time and geography, that has remained pretty stable. The proportion of farmers in a population is a pretty good indication of the amount of, inversely of the amount of food produced and of the rate of population growth. I mean, today, Canada has about 2% of its population working in agriculture. It produces many times more food than it can consume, is a net exporter of food, and produces more food than Bangladesh, which has a much larger population, 75% or 70% or so of whom are farmers, and which is a net importer of food to a huge degree. At this point in history, only about 17, 18 countries in the world are responsible for all of the world's population growth out of the 200-something countries. And if you look at a list of those 17 or 18 countries responsible for all the world's population growth, they happen to be the countries that have among the highest proportions of their population in subsistence agriculture, and also are the countries that are all dependent on imports of food as well. So Bose-Rupp's law has remained very important. Fortunately, it's being overcome. At this point, countries that had seemed to be subject to Malthusian crises a generation ago are now subject to Bose-Ruppian logic, including countries such as Iran and Turkey and Lebanon and the United Arab Emirates, China, Bangladesh very soon, all of which are approaching points where their populations will begin shrinking and will begin producing enough food to provide for themselves and so on. There's a hump to get over that will become a sustainability problem in that since 2008, the world has not been producing enough food as much as it consumes. We know that this will be overcome at some point as we get through this transition in population growth and food production, which tend to be mutually supportive things, but it's a very awkward period at the moment until there's enough investment in agriculture and so on. But we will approach at some point this century what you would call a post-Bose-Ruppian era, when most of the countries in the world, those that aren't involved in military conflicts and so on, which tend to mess this up, will be in a position of having fewer than 2.1 children per family, having most of their population not involved in agriculture and therefore producing a lot of food. And then we'll face the large economic problems that are associated with non-growing populations. One thing we do know about human communities is they are not steady state. There are some mammals that maintain steady populations. Humans tend to either grow in number exponentially or shrink in number fairly quickly. When we shrink in number, we develop what we call the dependency ratio problem, which is that a very large percentage of our population become the sort of people who cost a lot of money, which is to say people on pensions or people who need a lot of medical care or so on. And we don't really know how to get around that problem. It tends to cause a very quick fiscal crisis when you have a non-growing population. It's a benefit that all of us should be able to enjoy because humans are obviously subject to the laws of thermodynamics. We don't want to be wiped out because we increase in number too greatly, but we actually don't know how to run an economy with a shrinking population. Nobody really knows how to do it. And most of the other forms of sustainability you'll be hearing about here are reliant on the types of economies that require growing populations. So the paradox is that a constantly growing human population is obviously unsustainable for reasons that should be ecologically and physically evident to anybody, but every other form of sustainability that we desire requires resources that we don't know how to provide with a non-growing population. At some point this century, the recent estimates suggest that it'll be after I've passed away due to my limits of cell division. But at some point after the Hayflick limit does me in, our Earth's population will peak and start going down, and our children and grandchildren will have to worry about those other problems of human sustainability as we dwindle in number. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Kat Cizek, and I'm a documentary maker at the National Film Board of Canada with a project called High Rise, and I'm going to be talking about high-rise living. Great cities throughout history and across space often get defined, and also their sustainability, their cultural sustainability, is defined by great buildings, spectacular temples, banks, castles, and cultural monuments. And I just want to play a little game with you guys. This is the interactive portion of the evening. I just want to ask you, we'll go through these slides quickly, but if you happen to know the name of the building or the city that I show you, please do shout it out, and we'll go through them fairly quickly. Chichen Itza. Anybody? Cairo, good. Prague. The Library in Alexandria. Museum of Natural History in London. Al-Shahid Monument and Museum in Baghdad. Anyone? Zurich, Swiss National Bank. Opera House in Copenhagen. Deutsche Bank in Berlin. Art Science Museum in Singapore. This is the Farmers Bank in Owatonna, Minnesota. This is a bank in Hollywood. This one. The Dominion Bank here in Toronto that no longer exists. What do these buildings say about the civilizations that created them? And usually what they tell us is their relationship to gods, to money, and to nationhood. What about this building here? A city's everyday urban fabric, an ordinary residential high-rise building can tell us more than any other building, I'm going to argue tonight, about our civilization's respect for humanity. Ordinary high-rises are a barometer of this. And that's why I've spent the last 5 years documenting high-rise apartment buildings and the people who live inside them in a project called High Rise at the National Film Board of Canada. We've told stories from places like this, a high-rise in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and like this in the South City in Prague. And this is the largest public housing project in the world in Alamar, near Havana, Cuba, about 20 kilometers east. And we've collected these incredible stories in a high-rise project called Out My Window, and this is our digital high-rise, global high-rise. Every window is a different city in the world. Meanwhile, here in Toronto, back at this building, and this, by the way, we have 1,189 of these post-war concrete high-rise buildings in Toronto, just like this one. And that's more than any other high-rises across North America and in any North American city except for Manhattan. But we actually don't feel this as Torontonians because most of these high-rises are actually, this is a map, thanks to ERA Architects, of high-rises spread out very purposefully in the 60s and 70s, pushed out into our peripheries and our suburbs. And so we worked with, just to learn about the lives in these buildings that are so invisible to so many of us. Our team has been working with a group of high-rise residents, Irene, Preeti, Obi, Maggie, Jamal, and Faith. And using photography and photoblogging, the residents have been documenting their lives, have been created stories and photos from their own personal collection over a course of several months. And we then presented these photographs and these stories at City Hall with the former mayor in front of 350 people, urban planners, politicians, bureaucrats, in an effort to amplify residents' voices in the planning process. It was just an incredible evening of political poetry reading. People who had often never spoken in public before, had never been to City Hall, even though they've lived in Toronto for up to 16 to 20 years, never been downtown, taken that 20-kilometer trip downtown. And the idea was to bring the voices of the residents into the city building agenda of this town. And it really changed the tenor of the conversation around what to do with our high-rises in Toronto. Meanwhile, when things go wrong around the world, the instinct has become to blame the buildings and tear them down. And this has had an incredibly radical impact on the city of these buildings and the citizens that have lived in them. It's happened all over America and in the UK. Here, for example, in the very vilified Chicago Cabrini Green buildings that have been going down for a decade. I think they're all down now. Or here, for example, in Red Road, also in Glasgow, a very famous or infamous place. The last building went down just a few months ago. And as an alternative to demolition, I've been really inspired by the work of Graham Stewart. He's an architect here in Toronto, and here he is working with, you might recognize Kipling resident Jamal. And he's provided our city and the world with incredible examples of tower renewal. Here are some of the examples that he's shown us in Amsterdam, refacing the wall, the exterior walls of the building, connecting those buildings back to the city using transportation lanes, all sorts of very simple but incredibly powerful ideas. Here's another one in Prague again. Can you tell I'm Czech? This is the South City. 85,000 people live in South City. It's a huge high-rise community that in the 70s was quite, people didn't want to go there from downtown Prague. Now it's one of the most desired places to live in Prague. And we really discovered that healthy high-rises mean healthy cities. So we decided to do a project at the same high-rise, this one, with Graham and Jamal and other residents and architects. And what we did was did a tour of the high-rise and the space around them. We documented spots that have fallen out of use. This is an old tennis court. And then we had the architects and the residents draw out and reimagine the space around those buildings. And then we turned those incredible illustrations into a film called 1 Millionth Tower, where we took the illustrations and animators brought them to life in a film. A really incredible project. And then we translated all those images into an incredible art campaign in the subway of Toronto. Over 1 million commuters a day would pass through and see the images of a reimagined Toronto above them. So what can we learn from these post-war buildings and what we might do with them, especially for the new high-rises that we're building made of glass? This project took an incredible turn about a year ago when we were approached by the New York Times. Jerry Flahive, who's in the audience tonight, our producer, and I were approached by the New York Times to work on high-rises. They said, hey, high-rises, New York City, maybe we can do something here. And I ended up spending quite a bit of time in their archives to develop a project that we just launched yesterday at the New York Times site on newyorktimes.com. It's called The Short History of High-Rise, and I just wanted to show you a quick little trailer of that. This is 30 seconds. So next time you drive by a high-rise here in Toronto or anywhere else in the world, maybe we can, any of us and all of us should stop and think about what the residents inside and maybe even speak with them to learn about what our cities, how our cities and our futures can look. I really want to argue that very seemingly ordinary buildings can profoundly reveal the values of the society that has created them. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name's Andrew Heintzman. I'd like to start with a question. What was the most important transformative innovation or technology of the 20th century? Was it air transit, mass production of cars, television, internet? I'm going to argue that it was none of these, but rather the Haber-Bosch process, named after inventors Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch. These two German inventors discovered a way to fix nitrogen from the air into ammonia. Although the discovery was originally used to allow the German army to make explosives in the First World War, the more transformative result was soon apparent: to create synthetic fertilizer. The impact of this invention is really hard to exaggerate. Synthetic fertilizer led to an unbelievable increase in food production in the 20th century and of course, at the same time, an incredible increase in the population on planet Earth at the same time. And it's been estimated that as many as a third of the people alive today are alive because of the Haber-Bosch process. There are very few other inventions that can make that kind of claim. But as is often the case, the incredible innovation came with significant downsides. Firstly, because the process of making synthetic fertilizer is energy intensive, it linked inexorably our food production to hydrocarbons. And secondly, this invention broke the ancient connection between soil fertility and crop production. And so agricultural systems that for generations were used to preserve soil quality and fertility, so things like crop rotation, nitrogen fixing, fell out of favor and were replaced by an ever-increasing use of chemical fertilizers and other industrial inputs. So as a result, in the second half of the 20th century, we saw a doubling of the world food production, but we did so on the back of a 7-fold increase in synthetic fertilizer use and a dramatic decline in soil fertility globally. The largest study on this question of soil fertility was done by GLASOD, Global Assessment of Soil Degradation under the United Nations Environment Program. This is a multi-year study over in a number of countries, and they looked at soil fertility globally, and they found that 560 million hectares of farmland had been degraded mostly through the second half of the 20th century. That's approximately 38% of our total farmland around the world. And the world suffers a permanent loss of farmland due to human-induced land degradation of 5 to 6 million hectares a year, approximately 0.5% of the world's arable land area annually. And the conclusion of that report was, quote, "The Earth's soils are being washed away, rendered sterile, or contaminated with toxic chemicals at a rate that cannot be sustained." This then provides the underlying necessity for alternative farming methodologies. And it's especially important in a time of climate change when there will be uneven precipitation and greater premium on healthy soils that can retain moisture. 3 long-term studies, these were multi-decade studies, one in Switzerland, one in Pennsylvania, one in New Zealand, compared conventional farming practices to organic and biodynamic systems, and found that whereas conventional practices over time clearly do degrade soils, organic and biodynamic farming practices actually build soil fertility over time. Organic and biodynamic soils also retain moisture better, sustain more complex ecosystems than conventional farming practices. But of course, the impact of synthetic fertilizers go much beyond just soil degradation. Consider the effects of eutrophication. This is the runoff of nitrogen pollution into water systems that's led to a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, estimated to be 11,000 square kilometers. And it's put serious pressure on Canadian waterways. Lake Winnipeg's the one that we often read about. Other agricultural inputs are also very problematic. Consider the effect of pesticides, which are increasingly linked, amongst other things, to falling bee populations globally, what's known as colony collapse disorder. And bees are responsible, by the way, for about $20 billion worth of pollination in the United States alone annually. This should not surprise us, this connection between pesticides and colony collapse, considering that pesticides are designed to interrupt the neural systems of insects. That's what they are made to do. What may surprise us, though, is that humans are also vulnerable to pesticide use, particularly children. A 2010 study by Harvard University of 1,000 children between the ages of 8 and 15 found elevated traces of organophosphate pesticides associated with ADHD in children. When we hear results like this, it may be useful to recall that organophosphates were originally invented as a nerve agent for chemical warfare in the Second World War. Indeed, there's a growing body of evidence linking pesticides with a wide array of increased health risks that run the gamut from heart disease to cancer. And so it's becoming clear every day that how we eat affects our health tremendously. The growing incidence of diabetes and obesity in young people in North America is another example of how an obsession with the delivery of cheap calories can have a negative impact on nutrition and health. These are costs to society that we will not be able to afford for much longer. As it's predicted, the healthcare costs in Ontario could be as much as 80% of our public budget's dollars by 2030, which is also clearly not sustainable. However we look at it, our food systems today require a rethink and a redesign. A sustainable food system would take a more holistic view to the cost of food and consider the broader social and ecological costs in the equation. If we looked again with this lens, we would see that the food we eat today is not all that cheap. There's no way to undo the last 100 years of development in food and agriculture. There's no clear path back to a time prior to Haber and Bosch made their transformative discovery. So where do we go from here? The road forward will go through increasing focus on health. It will promote agricultural systems that protect or even replenish soils. And it will consider the broader impact of our food choices on society and the ecosystem. More than anything, though, a sustainable food system will begin with an increasing awareness and education about the role of food in our lives and the impact of the food choices we make. There'll be no magic bullet, no single answer to our food challenges. In fact, just the opposite. What we need now, more than anything, is a diversity of options and choice. Just as in a healthy ecosystem, we should nurture a wide variety of agricultural and food options. Let's call it a menu of possibilities from which to choose. A well-educated public, given the greatest choice possible and aware of all the trade-offs and costs inherent in these various options, will, I believe, gravitate towards the best options. Our job, those of us involved in providing sustainable options in food and agriculture, is to make those choices broadly available and to help provide information to allow people to make well-informed decisions about the food they eat. Thanks very much.
Hi, my name is Katrina Sokup, and I'm here tonight to talk about lost rivers. Now, I'm not an engineer, I'm not an architect, I'm not a historian, I'm a filmmaker. And my foray into the world of lost rivers actually began, appropriately enough, with an image. And that was a photograph by Andrew Emond. And it should be up there. And this is the St. Pierre River in Montreal. And now you notice, while the photo, to me anyway, is really beautiful and intriguing, it doesn't depict an environment that we normally associate with rivers. And that's because it's a photograph of a river buried into a Victorian sewer, a lost river. And at the time, Andrew's photograph blew my mind because it showed a part of my urban environment that I almost never, ever thought about. And when I did, I just thought of it as an ugly, dirty, and uninteresting place. But here it was, this beautiful architectural space. And the photograph actually sparked a huge curiosity in me to find out why this river was encased in brick and why some rivers are encased in concrete and not flowing above the ground. And what I learned, and what most people don't know, is that there are hundreds of lost and buried rivers flowing under Montreal, under Toronto, and in fact, under every industrialized city in the world. It's just that we as city dwellers tend to go about our daily lives driving down these straight grids of pavement without actually thinking about how the landscape has changed and what was there before the city existed. And so my question came to be, why did these rivers disappear from view, and how does that impact us today? Well, once upon a time, many rivers flowed. We built our houses on their banks, our roads hugged their curves, and their currents fed our mills and factories. But as these settlements grew into cities, we polluted rivers so much with human waste, with animal waste, and with industrial waste that they literally became open-air sewers. And interestingly, our solution 150 or 200 years ago wasn't to stop polluting the rivers. It was actually to bury them underground, where they have since flowed out of sight and out of mind. And then you can have another look at the St. Pierre River in a more modern sewer. But it begs the question of why should we care? Well, in the era of climate change, for many cities, buried rivers and Victorian sewers are starting to be a really big problem. July 8, 2013. Lost rivers made a really big splash, so to speak, during an intense rainstorm right here in Toronto last summer. Many homes, businesses, roads, and parks were flooded in what is considered to be Ontario's most costly natural disaster, with damage estimated at $850 million. And here's the video from that day at the Trinity Bellwoods Dog Bowl. And this little valley in the park is actually a vestige of the Garrison Creek, which now flows under the park in a sewer. And you saw maybe earlier a little geyser where the water was spouting out of a manhole cover. And I think we have to brace ourselves for this kind of extreme flooding occurring more and more often. Because like many cities around the world, Toronto has a combined sewer problem. because here, buried rivers have been merged into sewers for wastewater. And these outdated, crumbling Victorian infrastructures simply don't have the capacity for the population of today's cities. And so this, combined with increasing events of extreme weather, means that these underground pipes are very often way too full of water. And that mucky overflow, which is a mix of lost river, rainwater, and sewage, has to go somewhere. And in cities which are paved with asphalt and concrete, there is precious little place to go. And so what's the result? The result is flooding and polluting sewage spills into surrounding bodies of water like Lake Ontario here in Toronto. But lucky for us, there's a world full of visionaries who believe some of the solutions to these pressing urban problems just might be right under our feet. In Seoul, Korea, a river long forgotten under an 8-lane highway was daylighted or brought back to the surface and made the centerpiece of an 8-kilometer green space right in the middle of the city. Completed in 2005, Seoul represents a paradigm shift in our way of seeing water in the city. It's true that cities must act urgently to manage the effects of climate change and extreme weather events, but we also want to create urban green spaces and biodiversity, not only to better manage water, but to really celebrate it. A similarly ambitious daylighting project was undertaken in Yonkers, New York, and we captured that in our film. It was the centerpiece of an urban revitalization strategy for a city so economically depressed it risked becoming the next Detroit. Ardently supported by Mayor Boris Johnson, the London Rivers Action Plan in the UK aims to restore 15 kilometers of lost and neglected rivers by 2015. The goal is to protect the British capital from the devastating impacts of flooding due to climate change. And Toronto actually had its own daylighting project in the 90s, before the Seoul project, before London, before Yonkers. Architects James Brown and Kim Story proposed creating a series of permeable holding ponds that would hold water in very intense rainstorms in the former Garrison Creek Valley, in places like the Dog Bowl, and that would be to alleviate overburdened sewers. The ponds would filter and clean water naturally instead of having to send it to the treatment plant. But maybe they were a bit too ahead of their time, because actually, unfortunately, the City of Toronto rejected their proposal and decided instead to do what we've done for the last 200 years, and that is build more concrete pipes underground and storage tanks, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, though, as a filmmaker, what was fascinating to me is our human relationship to water. Over the course of making a film, we met all kinds of people inspired by lost rivers: artists, historians, ecologists, architects, just ordinary citizens, and of course people like Andrew, urban explorers and photographers. And to me, most interestingly, despite the fact that these rivers have been buried for almost 2 centuries in most cases, there seems to be something innate in us that is still drawing us to these rivers and to water. And we found that people want to reconnect to these disappeared waterways, and it's prompting them to ask, how can we bring life to our lost rivers? And I think in so doing, we can also ask if we can imagine an innovative future city that paradoxically moves forward by digging up its past. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Dave Harvey. I'm Executive Director of Toronto Park People. We're an independent charity that is the catalyst for better parks in the City of Toronto. What do good city parks have to do with building a sustainable society? In my opinion, city parks are the center point for so many different elements of a livable, successful city: good physical and mental health, beauty, inspiration, economic development, and most importantly, being the connections for all of our different communities. That's asking a lot from our parks, and most of our parks in Toronto don't meet those type of high standards. We could leave it up to the city and get them to bring up the parks to the standards that we all need, but I believe that we require the city to partner with community in order to get the parks that we need to fulfill our needs in the City of Toronto. The most obvious reason is the city just doesn't have the resources. But the second most important reason is that parks that have this strong link with community, in my opinion, are just much better parks. Our core principle at Park People is that when community gets involved, our parks get better. On partnerships in parks, most people head straight for the money angle. And yes, there's many great stories about fundraising from the community to support great parks in North America. The fantastically successful High Line in New York cost over $200 million, and most of that was raised from the community. We've got Chicago's Millennium Park, a brilliant park that cost over $500 million, with more than half of that being raised from the community. And in Canada, we've got Assiniboine Park, which is the first park conservancy in Canada, and they raised $35 million in the community that was supported by the city, the federal government, and the provincial government. Yes, community funding for parks is important and needed. We have to be extremely careful that we don't commercialize our parks, and just as important, we don't let government off the hook. Our role is to, and the community's role is to support government, make sure they fulfill the needs, what's needed in their parks, and then we go over and above that to deliver these kind of great parks we need. While money is always very nice, but in my opinion, the most important partnership element for parks is community involvement. The organization New Yorkers for Parks produces a report card on New York's parks each year, and the parks that come out on top every single year are the parks with the most volunteers, not the parks that raise the most money or the parks that are in the most affluent neighborhoods. These volunteers, like members of the more than 100 park friends or groups we have in Toronto that Park People work with, are the key to great parks. These volunteers turn parks from a place of grass and a couple of dead trees and broken benches into these thriving community hubs. Not only do they plant trees, they nurture these trees. In Toronto, we plant these very expensive trees in parks, and so often the trees just die because the city doesn't have the resources to water them. The Friends of Groups are nurturing the trees, mulching the trees, and watering them. Park groups put on fantastic events that animate the community and bring the community together. This is the Fire Festival in Maple Park in Etobicoke. Got a fantastic kite festival up in Milliken Park in Scarborough. Park groups take ownership of the park. They're the eyes and ears of the park. They work with the city to ensure that the neighborhood park is meeting their community needs. So where do we go with partnerships and parks in Toronto? First, the city needs to stop charging park friends for this kind of work. All these activities I've just described, the city needs weeks full of paperwork ahead of time. You have to pay for a permit and you have to pay for insurance. We need to start with ending that practice. But there are also opportunities for raising funding. The Waterfront Toronto is building wonderful parks, like this is Sherburne Common. There's also the Corktown Common. But once built, Waterfront Toronto gives them over to the City of Toronto, and the City of Toronto is right up front saying, we don't have the money to maintain these. Sherburne Common have these beautiful fountains, and this summer, the park's only 2 years old, but the fountains weren't working. Allen Gardens, it's a fantastic potential there. It's a beautiful historic park that could be a jewel and a great tourist destination and a real destination kind of park. Riverdale Farm, again, it's a nice place, but it could reach this incredible potential for being a real urban food hub in the city. New parks. There's this fantastic idea for a new 5-kilometer-long linear park just north of DuPont called the Green Line. Yeah, come on for the Green Line. And this park, unfortunately, didn't have, well, we're going to have it in a smaller role. This is hoarding at Yonge and Wellesley. There was a piece of land there owned by the provincial government that was worth $55 million, and the province chose to sell it to a developer instead of making it to a park, but the community is still working with the councillor to make a smaller park there at least. And again, there's a number of other conservancy opportunities around the city. And Park People is going to be making a real role to make some of those conservancies happen. But I really wanted to leave you with this last slide, which is from my favorite partnership story in Toronto. It's RV Burgess Park and Thorncliffe Park. And this is the new tandoor oven that was just opened about a week ago. And it was built by the Thorncliffe Park Women's Committee. And the Women's Committee has just done absolutely fantastic work in the park, turning it from a sad, quite scary, neglected space into the actual center for the community there. So this is the most kind of partnerships that we need more of in Toronto. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Karen Clark-Whistler. I'm the Chief Environment Officer at TD Bank Group, an ecologist who works at a bank. Some may consider that an oxymoron, but I've actually chosen the title of my talk tonight, Forests Too Big to Fail, because it reinforces the vital link between the environment and the economy. And it invites us to consider natural capital, our forests, our lakes, our ecosystems, as an equally valid way of measuring economic progress as the dollars that we currently measure it in. So I'm going to talk about forests in the context of natural capital. First, to set a bit of a context. For most of our history, an alien or a god looking down at Earth would have seen a world of vast oceans and land covered by huge forests. Until about 200 years ago, over 50% of our planet was covered in forests. Man's ascent would not have been possible without forests. We talk about the advent of fire, but what were they burning? Trees. Primitive and modern houses are largely built of wood. Is there anyone here today who has not been in contact with wood today? It's all around us. We don't even notice it. And as Canadians, forests are part of our natural identity, our national identity. We're known as hewers of wood, lumberjacks. We've got a maple leaf on our flag. And where would our national animal, the beaver, be without forests? We've cleared it, we've burned it, we've built with it, we've printed books made of it, paddled, and skied with it. But what we haven't done a great job of is protecting it. Globally, we've lost over 50% of our forests, and as you can see, there were few remaining areas of large intact forests left in the world, the Amazon and our Canadian boreal. We often blame the forestry sector for the destruction of our forests, and for about 100 years that was true. But despite what you may hear, the forest industry has transformed itself. They've recognized that working forests need to be managed sustainably. And they've set up certification programs such as the Forest Stewardship Council programs to ensure that consumers are aware of sustainable wood products. Canada now has more FSC certified forests than anywhere else in the world. The people we tend not to point fingers at are ourselves. Here in southern Ontario, we systematically cleared our forests to develop cities and suburban house farms until about the mid-1900s. At that time, we had less than 10% forest cover in southern Ontario. But the good news is that we in cities and urban settings are beginning to see the light, turning a new leaf, if you will. We're beginning to realize that urban forests and green space are not just something we should take for granted, but that they literally form the backdrop of our lives. That if they're not there, we miss them. When I was a kid, we moved to a brand new suburb. And guess what was the first thing we all did? We planted trees. Here in downtown Toronto, I'm lucky to live in an urban forest characterized by ancient oaks, maples, and pines, like so many of our city centers across the country. As we've heard, Canada is one of the most urbanized countries in the world and will become more so. There are pros and cons to that, but one of the heartening aspects, at least to me, is that the more we choose not to live in nature, the more we want to bring it back into our lives. When we ask our customers, who represent about 1 in 3 Canadians, what ecosystems most need to be protected, more than 90% say forests. Our urban forests are not only beautiful to live and play in, but they play a vital role in cooling the air in the summer, cleaning the air, protecting soil, absorbing greenhouse gases, and recycling water. From an economic perspective, studies in New York City have shown that urban forests provide a greater than 5 times return on investment in community benefit. So the Million Trees program, initiated by Mayor Bloomberg, which aims to plant 1 million trees by 2015, has been estimated to provide a $200 million benefit to that city. We all have a role to play in growing our urban forests and protecting our critical forest habitats. Over the centuries, we've taken a lot from the forest. Don't you think it's time to give back? Thank you.
Okay, David Buckland, I'm an artist, and just in case you think that artists don't suffer for what they do, this is me up in the Arctic. I've been up to the Arctic about 8 times. Each time I've led a group of people, scientists and artists, and the sole kind of thing that we're trying to make an inquisition about is, how much is the Arctic is changing due to climate change. So, this is us in a tiny little sailboat in the most incredible landscape you'll ever experience. 8 times up there we've looked at this. Each time we've worked with the scientists in the field, the oceanographers, the geologists, the atmospheric scientists, and we've learned. And it's an amazing process over the last sort of 10 years. One of the things we've learned most about is that the ice is disappearing and disappearing fast. And the other thing is that we are really, human activity way down south is causing it. But each time we go up, we kind of ask, okay, the artists, or the creative minds, can they come up with an experiment that will illustrate something very significant? So this is a piece by Sunam Prasad, an architect who used to be the president of the RIBA in England. So Sunam wanted to say, well, okay, what is the problem with us imagining the amount of carbon dioxide we put into the atmosphere? It's an invisible gas. How do you make this work? So with these atmospheric balloons, we're all standing there, again, suffering, minus 35 degrees. Pretty chilly. And that's the space they made. Now, Sinan worked all of the math out, and he said, well, okay, that cube of air that you're looking at right there, described by those balloons, is basically 1 ton of carbon dioxide by volume. And it's quite a big kind of area, right? Okay. Now, the other thing you've got to remember is every day, humanity around the rest of the planet is putting 90 million tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So now you're beginning to visualize the scale of what we're doing, which is kind of a very interesting kind of little artistic kind of trick. The other one is where that photographer is standing, you look at the distant horizon, is pretty much about 25 miles. So instead of looking out horizontally, you look vertically upwards. That is as thick, basically, as the atmosphere is. That tiny little red line there is the thickness of our atmosphere. So you kind of go 93 million tons per day into that atmosphere, which isn't that thick anyway, and you suddenly realize that we've got a problem. And we've got to start really taking it on board. And it's just a way of visualizing something as simple as carbon dioxide in a visible gas. This was an artwork done, again, in the Arctic, projecting onto a glacier. It was done in 2007. The term discounting the future was taken from the banking world. What they figured out was that they were making so much money so quickly, what you didn't have to worry about was the future. Well, that really worked, didn't it? 2008, boom, big crash. At the same time, that piece of iceberg that we're projecting onto won't be there in the future. So, it's again making a very emotive point. It's about something very, very simple and very, very powerful. This is an incredible photograph by Ed Batinsky. It is the tar sands, but I could also use, in this case, I could show you a coal field. I could also show you fracking and how that works. And there's something, I don't know, I keep looking at these kind of ways of doing the kind of creating the energy we need. And there's something quite desperate about it. You know, we are actually having to rip the planet apart in order to give ourselves the energy that we need. And we kind of go, wait a minute, is that the right way to be doing things? And there's a nice little cartoon here, you know, greenhouse gases from... What is extraordinary about this is we're using the same technology they had in the Stone Age to make our energy. We're burning stuff. You know, we're burning fossil fuels. There is no other way to get energy out of a fossil fuel other than burning it. Stone Age technology. And you think, ooh, shouldn't we have moved a little bit further along than this, than actually doing that kind of same kind of technology? Now, same kind of technology here. The other thing that, you know, since the Stone Age, that hasn't changed. I mean, it's basically the shape of our skull from the Stone Age as it is here, right in this room of all of our skulls. What has changed is the workings of that mind. The mind is still the same kind of outside technology. But inside that mind, we have actually built one of the most incredible complex societies you could ever imagine. I mean, I so celebrate, you know, we had Shakespeare, we can create Shakespeare, we have the arts, we have technology, we have health. The workings of that mind have been phenomenal. And it's extraordinary how we've managed to do that. And we should celebrate that. But at the same time, we kind of, inside that brain is the capability of denial, is the capability of inflicting fear, that I can really tell you something is going to be dreadful unless you do it. And the mind makes a collective kind of idea and kind of goes, whoa, you know, this is something that we've got to think about. You know, with climate change now, you kind of go, wait a minute, why don't we get the idea of climate change? What's stopping us? Where's the denial instinct in us that goes, whoa, I don't want to go there? So this is, you know, inside that brain is the capability for good things like this. Now, the IPCC report just got published. That was a collective of 270 of the best scientific brains around the planet. And they wrote a document over 1 million words long. And every single one of those words they all agreed on. It's the largest peer-reviewed science document ever made. It's a phenomenal document. And they came back and they threw it back at us and said, well, okay, we've done our work. Now you have your choices. If we work really hard and we take away and we decarbonize our way of living, our energy sector, we can limit the range of the heating of the planet to 1.7 degrees centigrade. Now, if you remember now, right now, we've actually increased it up to 0.5 degrees, 0.5, 0.6. Already, you can see crazy weather events that are happening around the world. That's at 0.5, 0.6. You go to 1.7, you're already going, whoa, this is going to be a little bit crazy, but we can cope with it. If we carry on business as usual, you're going to get up to 6, probably 7 degrees centigrade. And at that point, all bets are off. The planet isn't going to survive, or at least we desperately are not either. And that within the lifetime of my children. By the time my children are a little bit older than me, that's the kind of time frame the scientists are talking about. We have that decision to make now. We also have $6 trillion. That's the amount of money that they think is going to go into investing in the coal and fossil fuel industry over the next few years to carry on developing it. We could take that money and do it a very, very different thing with that money. Little red square called the world. That is the amount of energy we need per day generated by the sun falling on the Sahara Desert. At the moment, every day, the sun's energy that falls on our planet is 5,000 times more than we need. We need 1/5,000th of that. So you kind of go, wait a minute, you know, isn't there something wrong here? We should be actually rethinking, making new technology, and actually coming up with something much braver and much more exciting. I'm just going to show you this. This is an America's Cup. I'm a sailor, and I'm sorry, I just like this. It's a boy toy, I know. This thing is just phenomenal. I mean, look, this is what technology can do. This thing sails 4 or 5 times faster than the wind speed itself. If we have the capability of that technology to make that thing, just think what else we could do. I mean, you know, let's embrace all this capability. And the other thing is I just love the way these dudes are just working together. Ultimate boy tool, you know. If you think you're racing a car, I mean, this is much more exciting and a lot more dangerous. Okay, now, so what is this? What are we doing? We've got to reframe the brain. We've got to kind of go, wait a minute, is this something that we should be in denial, in fear of, or can we get excited by it? You know, so there's an exhibition coming up at the ROM where we took probably, something, I think 14 of the great Canadian artists, US artists, Mexican artists, and architects and music, and we've actually created and put them in bed with some of the best thinkers, the informers of our society, not just the scientists, the economists, the theologians, the politicians, and can they kind of come up with something new? That was the challenge to them 2 years ago. Now that all of this work's going on show, and it starts next week. And it's the beginning of a 4-month festival of art and climate, and creative endeavor to try and find a way through the climate in this kind of equation, and can we rethink it, revision it? And it's going to be a celebration. It's a world first, and it's happening here in Toronto, so come along to it. Now, where are we then? Okay, if we go back to the slide and we kind of go, can we change the economy from, a fossil-based economy, a carbon economy, and can we put it into a solar economy? Yes, we have the technology to do it. Yes, we have the money to do it. We have to reframe the brain in order to want to do it. And if we do it, we are on the cusp of the most extraordinary renaissance of human activity that ever existed. I really do believe that. And both the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment, we know them for their great periods of thinking, we know them for their great art. But actually, we probably don't realize that they both happened at exactly the same time that the economy of the world or the economy of the region completely flipped and reframed itself. In the Enlightenment, all of the money was controlled by the kings of that era, the French kings, the English kings. And along came the merchant classes, got new forms of money, invested it in the science, invested in everything that was going, and you ended up with the Age of Enlightenment. Same time with the Renaissance. So we are right at this point. If we just get over this hump of actually rethinking about the energy we need, then we actually have the capability of going forward into an incredible society. And yes, climate is all about culture. Thank you.
Well, sustainability, I think we could have had 152 7-minute speakers. We had 8. I don't know how your brain is feeling, but from Dennis's, they can live without us, but we can't live without them, which I think is what I took away from that, to Katarina's, I have a river under my house. It's called Tattle Creek. And when I first moved to Toronto, there's this thing called Tattle Creek Walk, and I thought, I'm looking around going, where is it? Where's the creek? Well, apparently it's under there, and it goes right under my house. So, yes, a lost river. I won't go through everybody. I want to thank all of our speakers, Dennis, Doug, Kat, Andrew, Katarina, Dave, Karen, and David. David, Dave, Dennis, Doug, Katarina, Kat, and Karen. What happened to Andrew? Sorry. I also want to thank our presenting sponsor, Alan Convery, and everyone at TD again, and to Vince Timpano and everyone at AMIA. And to our reception sponsor, I'm going to ask Adam Kahan to come up and say a few words. Ryerson University, my alma mater, has also been our partner on this event for the last 3 years. They are the reception sponsor. When you join us in a few minutes, please welcome the Vice President of University Advancement, Adam Kahan.
Well, thank you very much, Shirley. I was very taken, of course, this evening with these addresses, very stimulating. But I noted at the top of the program, and David, both of them referred to Ed Bertinsky, and I think it was very apposite because Ed's work is about the environment. If any of you have seen his last productions on water, on oil, and on manufactured landscapes, you know where his passion is and his dedication. And of course, suffice to say, he is the preeminent, I think, photographer in Canada, and suffice to say, of course, he's a Ryerson alumnus. I was also intrigued, by the way, of Doug's statement in the middle about nature is going to murder us. So I actually think it's the other way around. I think we're doing our best to murder nature, and I think we're doing a better job at it. Just very briefly, and I think it is relevant in terms of how we see ourselves at the university, we have 4 major foci in what we want to be and what we do. First and foremost, true to our DNA as a real-world, applied, connected, relevant university. Secondly, a great commitment to being a city builder. Our campus is right at the very busiest corner of Canada, and we integrate with the city. And it's important for us to recognize that our university is a very important part, we believe, of the city and impacted by the city. We are also known as the Innovation and Entrepreneurship University. And the other part is we are indeed wanting to be a force for social good. Our research has grown exponentially because of this. And this message of what Ryerson is doing has resonated. We are now the most applied to university in Canada relative to space. We get about 70,000 applicants for 7,000 spaces for our first year. So our commitment to sustainability is at the very heart and core of what the university does. And one of our most recent developments has been the creation of the Centre for Urban Energy. And this is a center that is dedicated to smart grid technologies and other systems that will provide for the demands of the city while at the same time focusing on sustainability and on clean environments. And there are a number of companies in our incubator, the Digital Media Zone, which I think is now the largest incubator in Canada, dedicated to all sorts of things. One of them, and I think if Lindsay Goodchild is here this evening, is Lindsay here? I want to give a shout out to Lindsay. She has got a company, there's Lindsay, talk to Lindsay. She's got a company dedicated to providing companies with the opportunity to engage their employees and their customers in sustainability. So this is what Ryerson is about. We are always pleased as an urban downtown university and as what we are to partner with an organization like Walrus to give relevant programs that do impact everyone's lives and to be a part of that going into the future. And yes, like our friends at TD, Shelley, you can count on us again for next year. Thank you.
Yay! Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Ryerson. I guess we'll see you next year. I'm going to ask Kelly to come up and be up here with me as we send you on your way, hopefully just to the back of the room. I want to thank you and everybody at the AGO for having us.
I guess we're in too. Huh?
I guess you're in too. That's great. I encourage you all to visit the AMIA Aeroplan, or the AMIA AGO rather, Photography Prize exhibit. And we love the AGO, but please do secretly go up to the ROM and see Carbon 14, then run right back to the AGO. Okay. Thank you very much.
She said that after I said we were in for next year. That's really low. Anyway, it's been our pleasure to host the Walrus and all of you here this evening. And as you can see, we're not having a typical Q&A because you know those horrible cocktail parties when you go and you think, I don't have anything to talk to anybody about? Now you have lots to talk to everybody about. And our speakers are going to join us at the bar. We invite you to join us there. Stick around for some conversation. And after you're done visiting the ROM, please come back and see Ai Weiwei, which is in its last 2 weeks. Maybe get a little bit of Bowie on the side. Enjoy your evening. Thank you very much indeed.